California.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for your testimony and participation today. Speaking of California, I can't help but observe that California is very well represented on this panel. Not only a point of pride for me as a senator from California, but it's frankly not a surprise since we are the creative and tech hub of the nation. Now, generative AI tools, as we've been talking about, present remarkable opportunities and challenges for the creative community and our broader society. And I couldn't help but observe that in reviewing the testimony from each of you, I noted the common goal of seeking to leverage and develop AI tools to complement and encourage human creativity and artistry, while also respecting the rights and dignity of the original creators. So it's a tall order, a delicate balancing act in many ways, but it seems to be the shared objective here. So I want to thank you again for participating in this hearing as we're working to determine what role we play in fostering the development of AI in a manner that is a net positive for innovation and creativity. My first question, and I'll keep it brief because it's sort of piggybacking on Senator Hirono's raised it, Senator Tillis is just trying to expand upon it, and it's directed at Mr. Brooks. This whole opt-in, opt-out, we can talk about what the process is, whether it's easy, clear, or not for artists. And I don't completely agree with you that we're in an early stage because it's happening fast. Tell me how it's possible, explain how it works to have a system unlearn inputs that have already been taken if you get this after the fact opt-out from an artist. It's happening now. While you're trying to think what it means long-term, it's happening now. So how does it work? Not just process, checking a box, filling out a form, but technically.
Thank you, Senator. So just in terms of that collection piece, I just want to make it clear that today it is very much a kind of work in process framework. You can go to this website, you can indicate you want to opt out. We will take those opt-out requests as they come in. But as we were talking about before, it's important that eventually there is a standardized kind of metadata that just attaches to these works as they go out into the wild. And as I say, that is what the EU is requiring, and I think there'll be a lot of standards development in that space, again, with firms like Adobe and others. In terms of what then happens, as I say, we filter that training data for a few reasons. We take out unsafe content. We adjust for issues like bias to correct for bias. And then in addition to that, we start to incorporate, as I say, the opt-out requests. Sometimes some of the models we release are retrained from scratch with new data sets. Again, they take into account the lessons learned through previous development, both as an organization, as a company, and potentially technical things that we've learned as well in that process. Some of the models that are released are just fine-tuned variations of the model. And so those ones may have the same kind of basic knowledge from that original training process, and there's just been some additional training to correct for certain behaviors or improve performance in specific tasks. So in terms of the future of this space, there is a lot of work being done on unlearning in general. How do you interpret the relationship between training and the data in training and the performance of the model, and how do you potentially adjust for that in different ways? But as I say, at this stage, we treat it as a process of incorporating those opt-out requests, retraining, and then releasing a new model trained on that new data set.
I hear you, and I just want to level set a little bit, not just out of the concern for the artists, but knowing that unless you're getting 1, 2, 3 inputs a day, which may be small enough to keep your arms around, I doubt that's the case. As we're getting into the hundreds and thousands of inputs per day to go in and relearn, unlearn, and comply with any consent or opt-out, it gets overwhelming and unfeasible real quick, and that's happening now. I also wanted to follow up on a subject matter that I think Senator Coons touched on earlier. We know that generative AI models need to be fed large data sets to learn how to generate images based on user prompts, just like Senator Tillis did. And by the way, that looked much more like Pacific Coast Highway than South Beach. Now, AI, this is now talking to folks back home, can only understand what it is taught, making it critical that for AI companies to train their models with data that captures the full range of the human experience. We want to be inclusive and diverse if we're going to be accurate in representing our users, representing the diverse backgrounds of all users. Now, Mr. Rao, you've explained how Adobe's Firefly seeks to avoid copyright infringement by being trained on only licensed Adobe stock images, openly licensed content, and public domain content. So how do you reconcile both? You want to be as inclusive as possible, which means as much data input as possible, but to avoid the copyright infringement, you're being selective in those inputs. That diversity of input is important, I think, for the diversity of output. So how do you reconcile?
Yeah, it's definitely a tension in the system, right? The more data you have, the less bias you'll see. So it's great to have more data. But when you set the expectations that we had for ourselves of trying to design a model that was going to be commercially safe, we took on the challenge of saying, can we also do that and minimize harmful bias? And the way we did that, we have an AI ethics team. We started that 4 years ago. And one of the key things they did when we were developing Adobe Firefly was not only do we have the data set and we understand what that is, we also did a lot of testing on it. We have a series of prompts, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of prompts we were testing against it to see what the distribution of the model, is there going to be a bias? If you type in lawyer, you're only going to get men or white men, and what does that mean, and how do you change that? And you can either change it by adding more data, making it more diverse, and so that means you have to go ethically source more data to diversify the data set, or you can add filters on top of the data set to force a distribution of what you expect to see if you're typing in certain search terms and make sure the bias is removed. So you can either do it by adding more data, or you can do it through adding filters on top of the model itself to ensure that you're going to get the right result.
And if you input senator, what comes out?
An amazingly handsome man and woman, just very intellectual.
Men and women,
Man and women.
colors across the spectrum.
Across the spectrum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.